If I told you that the worst heartbreak of my life didn't start with betrayal, but with a feeling, would you stay and listen? I'm sitting here right now, in the quietest corner of my house, and it feels louder than any stadium I've ever performed in. My phone is face down on the table. I don't want to see it light up. I don't want to see his name. I don't want to see nothing. Because sometimes the truth doesn't scream, it whispers. And those whispers have been driving me crazy. I never thought I would say this, but I think Benny is changing. You know that feeling when someone's energy shifts before their words do? When their eyes don't look at you the same way? When they sit next to you but feel miles away? That's where I am right now. I keep telling myself I'm overthinking. I keep saying, Selena, don't be insecure, don't ruin something good. But my heart is not stupid. Lately he smiles at his phone more than he smiles at me. And I hate that I even noticed that. There was a time when Benny wouldn't even let me feel alone for a second. When we first got together, he wrapped me in a kind of safety I didn't even know I needed. After everything I went through with Justin, I was fragile. I was tired. I was scared of loving again. And Benny, he was patient. He was kind. He looked at me like I wasn't broken. Back then, he would sit across from me at dinner and just listen. Really listen. If I had anxiety, he'd hold my hand under the table. If I cried, he'd wipe my tears before they even fell. He didn't drink. He didn't party like that. He would actually tell me to slow down sometimes. Sel, you don't need that, he'd say gently if I reached for wine. He was steady, calm, safe. But now he comes home late. Now he smells different. Now he doesn't ask how my day was. And the scariest part isn't what he's doing, it's what he's not doing anymore. He doesn't sit next to me on the couch. He doesn't reach for my hand first. He doesn't look at me like I'm his whole world. And I keep asking myself, is there someone else? I didn't want to believe it. I told myself I was being paranoid. I've been cheated on before. I've been hurt before. Trauma can make you see ghosts where there are none. So I tried to calm down. I tried to trust him. But then I started noticing little things. He started dressing differently, paying extra attention to how he looks when he goes out with friends. He laughs at messages and tilts his phone away from me. Not aggressively, just slightly, just enough. And that slight movement broke something inside me. I haven't confronted him, not yet, because I'm scared of what he might say, or worse, what he might not say. And the craziest part? In the middle of all this fear, my mind keeps drifting back to Justin. I didn't expect that. But heartbreak has a way of opening old doors. When Justin and I were together, yes, it was messy. Yes, he hurt me. There were other girls. There were rumors. There were nights I cried myself to sleep wondering why I wasn't enough. But there was also something real, something raw. We fought hard, but we loved hard too. Every time we broke, we somehow found our way back. Until the last time. And that's when Benny came in? I remember that period so clearly. I was vulnerable. Justin and I had just had one of our worst fights. I was exhausted emotionally. And Benny was there. He was supportive. He was comforting. He told me I deserved stability. He told me I deserved peace. And slowly, and I believed him. Slowly, I started pulling away from Justin. Not because I stopped loving him overnight, but because loving him felt dangerous. Loving Benny felt safe. At least that's what I thought. Now I'm sitting here wondering if I chose comfort over destiny. Did I leave too soon? Did I run into someone else's arms just to avoid facing the pain? Did I mistake kindness for forever? I hate that I'm even thinking like this, because if Benny is really changing, if he's really slipping away, then what does that say about me? Did I repeat the same pattern? Did I once again trust the wrong timing? The other night, he went out again, said it was just work stuff. I nodded, smiled, pretended I wasn't dying inside. But something in my chest told me this isn't just work. I wanted to follow him. I wanted to grab his phone. I wanted to scream, "Who is she?" But I didn't. Because I'm Selena Gomez. And sometimes being strong means suffering in silence. But silence is getting heavy, and I don't know how much longer I can carry it. Right now, I'm just sitting here staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every laugh, every touch, every promise, trying to find the exact second things started to change. Because heartbreak doesn't happen in one day. It builds. And I think it's building again. And this time, I don't know if I'll survive it the same way. You know what hurts the most? It's not even the possibility that he might be talking to someone else. It's the way my body already feels like I've lost him. There's this strange instinct women have. We don't need proof at first. We feel the shift. The silence grows teeth. The space between conversations becomes colder. And lately, every time Benny walks past me, it feels like there's an invisible wall standing between us. I tried to ignore it for days. I kept telling myself, Selena, you've been through trauma. Don't let your past create problems in your present. I even smiled more. I tried cooking dinner one night. I wore the dress he once said was his favorite. I laughed at jokes that weren't funny. But he didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and just didn't care. That's when fear turned into suspicion. I started watching him without making it obvious. The way he types, the way he locks his phone quickly, the way he suddenly started taking calls outside. He says it's work, meetings, industry stuff. But why does he lower his voice? Why does he smile like that? I hated myself for even thinking like this. I don't want to be that girlfriend. I don't want to be insecure. I don't want to spy. Trust is supposed to be the foundation, right? But what do you do when trust starts shaking? One night, he came home smelling like alcohol. That might not sound dramatic to some people, but for me, it was everything. Because Benny never used to drink like that. When we first got together, he was almost proud of how disciplined he was. He would tease me gently if I reached for wine. You don't need it, he'd say, brushing my hair behind my ear. He liked being in control. He liked clarity. Now he came home with red eyes and a different energy, louder, colder, distant. I asked him casually, did you have fun? He said, yeah, just had a couple beers with friends. A couple. But I could smell more than that. And I didn't argue. I just nodded. Because sometimes you don't fight when you're scared of the answer. That night I couldn't sleep. And that's when I did something I never thought I would do again. I called my best friend. Her name is Jenny. Jenny has been with me through everything. Through tours, through breakdowns, through Justin, through recovery. She knows my silence. She can hear my pain even when I pretend I'm fine. I didn't even know how to start the conversation. I just said, Jen, I think something's wrong. She didn't laugh. She didn't dismiss it. She just asked softly, what happened? And once I started talking, I couldn't stop. I told her about the phone, the distance, the drinking, the late nights, the way he doesn't sit next to me anymore. There was a long pause. Then she said something that scared me. Do you want me to check? I knew what she meant. And I hated that I even considered it. If I followed him myself, he would know. And if he found out, he'd say I don't trust him. He'd turn it on me. And I couldn't handle another relationship where I'm the crazy one for noticing red flags. So I whispered, yes. I asked my best friend to watch my boyfriend. Even saying that makes my chest tight. For the next few days, I acted normal. I smiled. I kissed him goodbye. I told him I loved him. And he said it back. But it didn't sound the same. Meanwhile, Jenny kept quiet. She didn't update me every hour. She just said, give me a few days. Those few days felt like years. Every time Benny left the house, my stomach dropped. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart stopped. I was living in this strange space between denial and confirmation. And in that waiting, memories of Justin kept creeping back. I remembered how I found out about other girls back then. Screenshots, rumors, late-night headlines, the humiliation of the world knowing before I did. But with Justin, even when he messed up, I knew his heart. He was chaotic, emotional. But when we were good, we were unstoppable. When we fought, it was loud. But when we loved, it was louder. With Benny, it was calm. Too calm. And now this calm feels like distance. Day 5. Still nothing from Jenny. Day 6. I almost texted her to forget it. I almost told myself I was overreacting. Day 7. My phone rang. It was her. I didn't breathe when I answered. Her voice wasn't dramatic. It wasn't panicked. It was controlled. Sel, I need you to sit down. And in that moment, I knew. Sometimes you don't need the full sentence. Just the tone. I sat on the edge of my bed, gripping the sheets like they were the only thing holding me together. She said, I followed him twice. He's not just going to work. My vision blurred. She continued, he's meeting someone. I couldn't even ask who. My ears were ringing. And then she said the words that shattered whatever denial I had left. I took pictures. Pictures? Proof. Reality. And suddenly the feeling I had been trying to suppress for days wasn't paranoia anymore. It was truth. And I wasn't ready for it. I didn't open the pictures right away. Isn't that crazy? After begging for the truth, after losing sleep for a week, after asking my best friend to risk everything for me, I couldn't even look. Jenny had sent them. 3 photos. My phone felt heavier than it ever had in my life. I just stared at the screen. My hands were shaking so bad I had to put it down on the bed. Because once you see proof, you can't unsee it. And a small, desperate part of me was still hoping I was wrong. I finally opened the first picture. It was him. Benny. Standing outside a restaurant I've never been to. He was smiling. Not the polite industry smile, not the quick photo smile. The real one. The one he used to give me when I'd surprise him with something small. The second picture hurt more. He was sitting across from a girl. She wasn't famous. I didn't recognize her. She looked normal. Simple. Pretty in a quiet way. They were leaning slightly toward each other. And he was holding a beer. A beer. I zoomed in like I was searching for a mistake. Like maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was an angle. Maybe it was lighting. But it was him. And then the third picture. They were walking out together, not holding hands, but close enough. Too close. Close the way people are when something is starting. My chest felt like it caved in. I didn't cry at first, I just went numb. Jenny texted me, "I'm so sorry." I didn't know what to reply. What do you even say when your worst fear becomes visible in HD? I kept staring at that second picture. The beer in his hand, the relaxed posture, the way he was leaning in like he was interested. Interested? That word kept echoing in my head. Because when we first started dating, that's how he used to look at me. Curious, focused, present. When did that stop? I thought about the last few weeks. The way he avoided eye contact, the way he laughed at his phone, the way he stopped asking about my day. It wasn't sudden, it was gradual. And maybe that's what hurts the most. This wasn't a drunken mistake. This was a shift. And suddenly memories of Justin hit me like a wave. I remember when I first found out Justin was entertaining other girls. The world made it dramatic. Headlines, comments, opinions. But behind all that noise, it was just me in a room crying. But even then, Justin was fire, passion, chaos. When I confronted him, he reacted. We fought. We screamed. We broke things and then somehow rebuilt them. With Benny, I don't even know if there's going to be a fight. Because what if he's already emotionally gone? That thought scared me more than cheating. Because emotional distance is quiet. It's polite. It doesn't leave obvious scars. It just slowly removes you from someone's future. I started replaying everything from the beginning. When Justin and I had that last big fight, I was exhausted. He had made mistakes, yes. He had let other girls get too close. But we always found our way back. Always. Until that time. And in that vulnerable moment, Benny stepped in. He was supportive. Calm. He told me I deserved better. He told me I deserved loyalty and peace. And I believed him. Maybe I needed to believe him. Maybe I was tired of the roller coaster. So I chose stability. I chose comfort. I chose the man who didn't raise his voice. But now I'm staring at a picture of that same man holding a beer with another girl. And I feel stupid. Not because he changed, but because I ignored the signs. I remembered something specific. A few weeks ago, I had asked him, "Are you happy?" It was random. We were sitting on the couch. He paused. Just for a second. Then he said, "Yeah, of course." But that pause. That tiny pause. It's louder in my memory now. Was that the moment he was already drifting? Or was I? I looked at myself in the mirror after seeing the photos. I didn't look like a pop star. I looked like a woman who feels replaced. And the worst part? I started comparing. Is she calmer than me? Less complicated? Does she not carry the history I carry? Does she not have headlines attached to her name? Maybe he wanted simple. Maybe I'm too much history. I sat on the floor and finally cried. Not loud, not dramatic. Just quiet tears. The kind that feel heavy and tired. And in between those tears, a terrible thought crossed my mind. What if I left Justin for this? What if I walked away from a love that, despite its chaos, was real? For something that was temporary? Yes, Justin hurt me. Yes, he entertained other girls. But he always came back. And I pushed him away the last time. Because I thought I found something better. safer, more mature. And now I'm here, holding proof that history might be repeating itself. But this time, I don't know if I have the strength to fight. Because fighting requires two people. And I'm starting to feel like I'm the only one still standing in this relationship. I haven't confronted Benny yet. He's in the other room right now, scrolling, laughing softly at something on his phone. And I'm here, with pictures, with regret, with memories of a love I once had, and a terrifying question echoing in my heart. Did I choose the wrong man, or did I just lose both? I didn't sleep that night. And when morning came, it didn't feel like a new day. It felt like a continuation of something that had already ended inside me. The sunlight came through the curtains exactly the same way it always does, soft and golden, touching the edges of the room like nothing in the world had changed. But everything had changed. I lay there staring at the ceiling while my mind replayed the images again and again, like a movie that refuses to stop even when you close your eyes. Him smiling, him leaning forward, him holding that glass like he belonged somewhere else. And the worst part wasn't even jealousy, it was recognition. I recognized that expression on his face because once upon a time, that was the way he looked at me. There is something deeply painful about realizing you are not imagining a shift. You are witnessing a replacement. He walked into the room while I was still pretending to be asleep, and I could feel his presence before I saw him. The bed dipped slightly as he sat down, and for a second, just a second, I thought he might touch my shoulder the way he used to. Gently, carefully, like I was something fragile and precious. But he didn't. He just checked his phone. The silence between us wasn't loud. It was polite, controlled, distant. And that politeness hurt more than cruelty ever could. Because anger means emotion still exists, but indifference. Indifference is a quiet goodbye. I kept my breathing steady, afraid that if I moved even slightly, he would see everything written on my face. The betrayal, the fear, the humiliation of knowing something he hadn't confessed. When he left the room, I finally sat up and looked at my reflection in the mirror across from the bed. I tried to see myself the way he sees me now. Not the version of me who laughs too loud when she's nervous. Not the version who overthinks silence. Not the version who carries memories like invisible scars. I tried to see what changed. But nothing had changed on the surface. Same face, same eyes, same woman who loved him honestly. And that realization created a different kind of pain. The kind that whispers, maybe it was never about you changing at all. Maybe people just stopped choosing you. And they never tell you when that decision happens. I carried my phone with me all morning like it was a secret I couldn't put down. I wanted to confront him. I wanted to place the pictures in front of him and watch his reaction. Would he deny it? Would he explain? Would he apologize? But something stopped me, not fear of conflict, but fear of confirmation. Because suspicion still leaves room for hope, but truth locks the door behind it. So instead, I moved through the house like a guest in my own life, responding normally, speaking softly, playing a role I didn't remember auditioning for. And he matched that performance perfectly. Casual questions, short answers, no depth, no curiosity. Two people sharing space without sharing presence. Later that afternoon, when he left again, I sat alone at the dining table where we used to talk for hours when everything was new and effortless. I remembered the early days of us, how attentive he was, how carefully he listened, how he seemed to understand my quiet moods without needing explanations. That memory didn't comfort me. It confused me. Because people don't transform overnight. Love doesn't vanish like light switching off. It fades, it loosens, it withdraws slowly. And somehow you never notice the exact moment it begins leaving. That is the cruel design of emotional distance. It erases itself gradually so that by the time you feel the absence, it has already settled in permanently. Jenny called me again that evening, her voice softer than usual, like she was trying not to break something fragile inside me. She asked if I had confronted him yet, and I told her no, and even as I said it, I heard the exhaustion in my own voice. She didn't pressure me. She just reminded me of something simple but terrifying. Silence protects the person who's hiding, not the person who's hurting. Her words stayed with me long after the call ended, because deep down I knew she was right. Avoiding truth doesn't preserve love. It only delays grief. As night came, the house felt colder, even though nothing about the temperature had changed. I sat on the couch where we used to sit close, enough that our shoulders touched without thinking about it. Tonight there was space. Intentional space. I realized something then that I had been resisting all week. I wasn't afraid of losing him because he might be with someone else. I was afraid because I could already feel that he had emotionally stepped away, and I had been loving a memory while he had been living a transition. And in that quiet realization, a deeper regret surfaced, not just about him, but about every decision that led me here. The moment I chose comfort over uncertainty, the moment I believed stability meant permanence, the moment I convinced myself that a calm love could never fracture the way passionate love once did. But calm doesn't mean strong. Quiet doesn't mean loyal. And safety. Safety can be temporary when it depends on someone else's consistency. I sat there long after midnight, listening to the sound of my own breathing. And for the first time, I allowed myself to accept something I had been resisting since the first picture appeared on my phone. This wasn't confusion anymore. This wasn't insecurity. This wasn't imagination. Something between us had ended. And the most painful part was realizing it might have ended long before I noticed. I decided the truth doesn't arrive as a dramatic moment, it settles quietly inside you when denial gets too tired to keep performing. That evening, I watched him move through the house like someone who belonged there physically, but not emotionally. He asked if I wanted dinner, and I said yes. And we sat across from each other like two people who had learned the choreography of normalcy so well that even silence looked rehearsed. He spoke about small things, work, traffic, random conversations, and I listened carefully, searching for hesitation, searching for distance disguised as casualness. But distance doesn't always announce itself through what someone says. Sometimes it reveals itself through what they no longer ask. He didn't ask how I felt. He didn't ask why I looked tired. He didn't notice the weight behind my eyes. And that absence of noticing felt louder than any confession could have been. While he talked, my mind drifted somewhere dangerous, and not to anger, not to confrontation, but to memory. I remembered the version of him who once studied my expressions, like they were important signals. I remembered the patience, the attentiveness, the quiet reassurance that I was safe with him. And sitting there now, watching him casually sip water like nothing in the world had shifted, I felt a strange disconnection from time itself. It was as if two realities were overlapping, the past where I was chosen, and the present where I was tolerated. And the hardest part of emotional change is that it rarely gives you a clean transition. You don't get a moment where love clearly ends. You just wake up one day realizing you are no longer being met where you stand. After dinner, he returned to his phone again. That small rectangular screen had become a doorway I wasn't allowed to approach. He tilted it away unconsciously, not aggressively, not secretively, just enough to signal privacy without explanation. That subtle gesture broke something deeper inside me than any argument could have. Because secrecy without confrontation leaves you suspended between dignity and desperation. If I asked, I would be accusing. If I stayed silent, I would be complicit in my own confusion. And so I chose stillness, but not because I was calm, because I was afraid that once truth entered the room, nothing of us would remain intact. Later that night, when he fell asleep beside me, I lay awake studying the ceiling again, tracing invisible lines across the surface as if answers might be written there. My mind returned to the photographs, to the slight lean of his body towards someone who wasn't me, to the ease in his posture that I hadn't seen directed at me in weeks. And slowly, something inside me shifted from shock to clarity. Betrayal isn't only about physical presence. It's about emotional migration. It's about attention relocating. It's about the gradual redirection of care. And once attention moves, everything else follows quietly behind it. In that stillness, I allowed myself to revisit a memory I had been avoiding, the final days of my previous love, the exhaustion, the misunderstandings, the moment when I believed choosing stability meant choosing healing. At the time, I thought stepping away from chaos was growth. I thought calm meant safety. But lying there in the dark, I realized something more complicated. Safety that depends entirely on another person's. Constancy is never permanent. It is conditional. And I had built emotional shelter inside someone who was, like all people, capable of changing without warning. The next morning, I woke with a strange sense of emotional gravity, as if something inevitable had drawn closer. He moved through the routine of the day normally. Coffee, messages, quiet movements. Marmon, I watched him carefully, not as a partner, but as an observer studying a shift already in progress. It wasn't that he was cruel. It wasn't that he was dismissive. It was something subtler and more painful. He was simply elsewhere in spirit. His presence had become partial, and partial presence is one of the loneliest experiences two people can share. Jenny texted me again asking how I was holding up, and I realized I didn't know how to answer honestly. Pain was there, yes, but so was something quieter. Recognition. Recognition that the relationship I believed I was protecting might already exist only in memory. Recognition that love cannot be preserved through silence alone. Recognition that waiting for clarity is sometimes just another form of avoidance. I spent that afternoon alone, walking slowly from room to room, touching objects that once held shared meaning. The couch where we talked late into the night. The kitchen counter where laughter once came easily. The doorway where he used to pause just to look at me before leaving. Every space held evidence of a past version of us that felt both real and unreachable. And that's when the deepest realization settled in. Grief doesn't begin when a relationship officially ends. It begins when you first notice you are no longer being emotionally held the same way. By evening, a quiet resolve had formed inside me. Not anger, not confrontation, just awareness. I understood something clearly for the first time. I could not control whether he stayed emotionally present, but I could no longer pretend I didn't feel the distance. Denial had protected me long enough. Silence had given me time to process. But truth, once recognized internally, eventually asks to be spoken aloud. That night, as we sat again in the same room with the same polite distance between us, I realized something irreversible had shifted inside me. I was no longer waiting to discover the truth. I was preparing to face it. The moment I accepted that something had already changed, my fear didn't disappear, it transformed. Before I was afraid of what I might discover. Now I was afraid of how long I had been pretending not to see it. There is a strange kind of clarity that comes when your heart stops. Negotiating with denial. You begin noticing everything with painful precision. The tone of his voice. The absence of casual touch. The way conversations begin and end without depth. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It was erosion. Slow, quiet, emotional erosion happening in plain sight. That evening, he sat beside me on the couch again. But the distance between us felt measured, intentional. Not physical distance, but emotional spacing. The television played something neither of us was watching. The light from the screen reflected in his eyes, and I found myself studying his profile the way someone studies a photograph from a life that already feels finished. I wondered if he could feel the shift inside me too, the part of me that had stopped, chasing reassurance and started observing reality. I wondered if he knew that silence, when shared long enough, becomes its own language. I almost spoke then. The words rose inside me naturally. I know. I saw. Tell me the truth. But something held them back. Not weakness, but awareness. Confrontation changes the shape of a moment forever. Once spoken, truth rearranges everything around it. And I realized I didn't want a reaction born out of surprise or defensiveness. I wanted honesty that existed even without pressure. But honesty rarely arrives voluntarily when someone is already drifting away. Later that night, when he stepped out to take another call, I remained where I was, staring at the empty space he left behind. I tried to remember the last time he had chosen to sit close without distraction, the last time conversation flowed without effort, the last time I felt emotionally reached instead of politely acknowledged. The memory didn't come easily, and that absence of memory felt heavier than any single betrayal could have. Because cheating can be an event, but emotional absence is a process, and processes leave fewer obvious moments to confront. Jenny called again, and this time I didn't hide the exhaustion in my voice. I told her something simple but difficult. I don't think I'm confused anymore. She stayed quiet for a moment, then asked the question I had been avoiding internally. Do you still feel loved, or do you feel remembered? The difference between those two states hit me immediately. Being loved is active, present, responsive. Being remembered is passive, distant, respectful, but detached. And when I answered her, I didn't need to think. I feel remembered, I said. That realization didn't shatter me the way I expected. It settled into me slowly, like a truth that had been waiting patiently to be acknowledged. Because deep down, I already knew love cannot survive on routine alone. It needs presence. It needs curiosity. It needs choice renewed again and again. And somewhere along the way, that renewal had stopped happening between us. After the call, I walked through the house in silence, touching familiar spaces like someone revisiting a place before leaving it behind. Not because I had decided anything final, but because awareness changes how you exist in a shared space. Every room held echoes of earlier versions of us. Laughter, comfort, small gestures that once felt effortless. But memory doesn't sustain connection. It only documents what once existed. And standing there, I realized I had been living inside documentation while hoping for continuation. When he returned, he looked at me briefly, almost as if he sensed something unspoken had shifted. There was a moment, brief but real, where our eyes met without distraction. And in that moment, I didn't see guilt or confrontation. I saw distance. Not coldness. Not cruelty. Just distance. And strangely, that was harder to face than anger would have been. Anger implies engagement. Distance implies departure already underway. We spoke normally that night. Routine words. Surface conversation. But something inside me was no longer participating in the illusion of normalcy. I was present but aware. Calm but awake to the quiet unraveling that had been happening for weeks. And with that awareness came a different kind of strength. Not the strength to fight for something already slipping away, but the strength to remain emotionally honest with myself, even if the other person chose silence. When I lay down to sleep, I didn't stare at the ceiling searching for answers the way I had before. Instead, I listened to the quiet rhythm of the room, to the subtle distance that now felt undeniable. And for the first time since the photographs, a new question replaced all the others. Not is he changing? Not is there someone else? But something deeper, more personal, more irreversible. What do you do when you realize you are holding on to someone who has already loosened their grip on you? The answer didn't arrive that night, but the question stayed. And sometimes the moment a question becomes unavoidable, change has already begun. There is a quiet kind of heartbreak that doesn't break you. All at once, it separates you from yourself piece by piece until one day you realize you've been living half present in your own life. That realization didn't arrive with tears or panic. It arrived in stillness, in observation, in the way I began noticing my own silence more than his. I wasn't asking questions anymore. I wasn't searching his face for reassurance. I wasn't trying to repair something I could no longer reach. Instead, I was watching the space between us with a strange calm, like someone standing on a shoreline observing a tide that had already begun to recede. The next morning felt different, not because anything external had changed, but because I had stopped expecting it to. Expectation is a form of hope, and hope requires participation from two people. When I walked into the kitchen, he was already there, scrolling through his phone, his expression neutral, relaxed, somewhere else entirely. He looked up, smiled politely, and asked if I slept well. It was a normal question, a kind question, but it felt like something spoken from habit rather than connection. And I realized then that kindness without presence can feel lonelier than distance without politeness. I answered simply, and we moved through the morning like two people who had learned how to coexist without truly meeting. Every movement felt careful. Every interaction felt measured. Not tense, just restrained. And that restraint carried a truth I could no longer avoid. When love is alive, presence is effortless. When love is fading, awareness becomes constant. I was aware of everything now. His tone, his posture, his pauses. And that level of awareness is not intimacy. It is vigilance. Later that day, I sat alone with my thoughts and allowed myself to ask a question I had been resisting since the photographs arrived. When did I stop feeling chosen? The answer didn't come as a single moment. It came as a sequence of small memories, conversations cut short, shared silences that never deepened, laughter that didn't invite response, attention that no longer returned. Love rarely ends dramatically. It withdraws gradually, like light fading at sunset, so slowly that your eyes adjust before you realize darkness has arrived. I thought about the earlier version of myself in this relationship, the one who believed stability meant permanence, the one who trusted consistency because it felt different from chaos, the one who allowed comfort to define security. That version of me wasn't wrong. She was hopeful. But hope, when placed entirely in another person's emotional constancy, becomes fragile. And I began to understand something painful but clarifying. Emotional safety cannot be borrowed permanently from someone else. It must exist within you first. That realization didn't remove the hurt, but it changed its shape. The pain was no longer sharp or shocking. It was heavy, steady, grounded in awareness rather than fear. I was no longer waiting for confirmation of distance. I was living inside it. That evening, when he returned home, something subtle shifted again. He greeted me warmly, asked about my day, spoke gently. On the surface, nothing was wrong. But emotional truth does not live on surfaces. It lives in depth, in curiosity, in attentiveness, in the unspoken energy between words. And that depth remained absent. We spoke, but we did not connect. We shared space, but not presence. And I felt something unexpected rise inside me. Not anger, not desperation, but clarity. Clarity that silence had protected me long enough. Clarity that awareness without expression eventually becomes self-betrayal. Clarity that waiting for someone else to acknowledge distance does not restore closeness. I realized something profound in that moment. I had been afraid that confronting truth would end what remained between us. But what remained had already changed. And avoiding truth was not preserving love. It was postponing acceptance. When night came, I didn't lie awake replaying memories or questioning intuition. Instead, I lay quietly, listening to the steady rhythm of the room, aware of his presence beside me and equally aware of the emotional distance that had settled between us like something permanent. And for the first time, a different feeling replaced confusion. I felt ready. Not ready to accuse, not ready to argue, but ready to speak honestly without needing the outcome to protect me. That readiness didn't come from strength alone. It came from exhaustion. The exhaustion of holding questions that no longer needed answers to exist. The exhaustion of protecting a version of us that had already faded. The exhaustion of loving someone who no longer met me in the same emotional space. As I closed my eyes, a quiet understanding settled in my chest. Whatever conversation was coming would not be about discovering truth. It would be about acknowledging what had already been felt. And in that acceptance, something inside me steadied. Because sometimes the most difficult moment is not the confrontation itself. It is the moment you realize you are finally ready to have it. The decision to speak didn't arrive as courage. It arrived as inevitability. There is a point where silence no longer protects your heart. It only prolongs its confusion. That evening, the air between us felt unusually still. As if even the room sensed something unspoken was approaching the surface. He was sitting at the table, scrolling absent-mindedly, while I stood near the window watching the light fade slowly into evening. For weeks, I had watched shadows grow inside this relationship. Now I was watching an actual sunset, and something about that quiet transition mirrored what I had been feeling internally. I'm not abrupt, not dramatic, just gradual dimming. I walked toward him calmly. Not with anger, not with accusation, but with a strange steadiness I hadn't felt before. My heartbeat wasn't racing. My hands weren't trembling. It was as if clarity had replaced fear. When I sat down across from him, he looked up immediately, sensing something different in my posture. There are moments when words have not yet been spoken, but truth is already present in the space between two people. This was one of those moments. "I need to talk to you," I said quietly. He nodded, attentive but cautious, like someone who knows a shift is coming but doesn't yet know its direction. For a few seconds, I simply looked at him, really looked at him, trying to reconcile the person in front of me with the version of him I had been holding onto in memory. And in that silence, I realized something important. This conversation wasn't about proving betrayal. It wasn't about demanding explanations. It was about naming the distance that had already changed us both. "I feel like you're somewhere else," I said softly. Not physically, emotionally. He didn't interrupt. He didn't defend himself immediately. He just listened, and that listening told me more than denial would have. Because when someone feels wrongly accused, they react quickly. But when someone hears truth, they grow quiet. I continued, choosing honesty without aggression. I spoke about the shift I had felt, the absence of presence, the subtle changes that had accumulated over time. I didn't mention photographs. I didn't mention suspicion. I spoke only about emotional reality, the only evidence that had mattered long before proof arrived. He exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair, his eyes no longer avoiding mine, but no longer holding them fully either. And in that expression, I saw something I hadn't allowed myself to name before. Hesitation not born from confusion, but from recognition. "I didn't know how to say it," he admitted quietly. Those words did not shatter me. They settled inside me like something I had already known but needed to hear spoken aloud. There was no dramatic confession, No detailed explanation, no sudden emotional collapse. Just acknowledgement of change. And that acknowledgement carried a strange kind of relief alongside the pain. Because uncertainty is heavier than truth, even when truth hurts. He spoke carefully, choosing words that sounded sincere but incomplete. He talked about stress, distraction, emotional distance that just happened. He didn't deny meeting someone new, but he didn't define it clearly either. And I realized something crucial in that moment. Sometimes people don't betray you through deliberate decisions. Sometimes they drift, and that drifting becomes its own form of departure. I listened without interruption, not because I was unaffected, but because I had already moved beyond the stage of needing justification. My heart wasn't searching for reasons anymore. It was recognizing reality. When he finished speaking, silence returned, but this silence felt different from all the others we had shared recently. It was no longer protective silence. It was revealed silence, a space where truth had finally entered and rearranged everything quietly. "I wish you had told me when you started feeling different," I said gently. He looked down, unable to respond immediately, and that inability spoke louder than explanation. Because love that is still fighting does not remain silent when asked to speak. Silence in that moment meant something had already loosened long before either of us named it. What surprised me most was not his admission, but my own emotional response. I wasn't breaking apart. I wasn't begging. I wasn't trying to convince him to stay emotionally present. I was simply acknowledging what had already changed. And in that acknowledgement, I felt something unexpected. Not peace, but alignment with truth. We sat there for a long time without speaking further. Not as partners trying to repair something, but as two people recognizing that a shift had occurred neither of us could reverse by will alone. And I understood something deeply human in that moment. Relationships don't always end because love disappears completely. Sometimes they change because presence fades, attention moves, and emotional energy quietly redirects itself elsewhere. When I stood up from the table, nothing dramatic happened. No raised voices, no final declarations, just awareness shared openly for the first time. And that awareness carried both grief and clarity together, inseparable. Later that night, as I sat alone in the quiet room, I realized something had indeed ended. Not the relationship entirely, not yet, but the illusion that nothing had changed. The uncertainty that had haunted me for weeks had dissolved, replaced by a simpler, heavier truth. I was no longer wondering what was happening. I was finally facing what had already happened. After truth enters a room, nothing looks different, but everything feels rearranged. The furniture stays where it was. The walls don't move. The same quiet fills the space. Yet something invisible shifts its weight, and you realize you are no longer standing in the same emotional place you were before. That night, after our conversation ended and the house returned to silence, I didn't feel the urge to cry immediately. Instead, I felt a strange stillness, like a storm had passed not through the outside world, but through the space inside my chest. The tension of uncertainty had dissolved, and what remained was heavier but clearer. A calm recognition that something we once shared effortlessly had already loosened beyond what denial could hold together. He moved through the house gently, respectfully, as if careful not to disturb something fragile between us. And I understood that gentleness not as closeness, but as distance acknowledged. There was kindness in his tone, but it carried the quality of someone who already stands slightly outside a shared future. That realization didn't ignite anger in me. Instead, it revealed something more difficult to accept. Love can exist in fragments even when connection weakens. Care can remain while presence fades. And two people can wish each other well while no longer reaching for each other in the same way. I spent that night sitting near the window again, watching the city lights appear one by one in the distance. Each small glow reminded me of moments that once felt permanent, simply because they were consistent. Shared routines, familiar laughter, quiet companionship, those memories were real. They hadn't been illusions. But permanence is not guaranteed by sincerity. It is sustained by continued choice, by renewed attention, by emotional presence that remains active rather than assumed. And somewhere along the way, that active presence had slowly receded between us. Not through one decisive moment, but through many quiet ones that seemed harmless at the time. What surprised me most was not the sadness itself, but the clarity that followed it. I no longer needed to reconstruct timelines or question instincts. The story had already unfolded. The distance I felt had been real. The shift I noticed had not been imagination. And in accepting that, I felt a quiet return to myself. Not the version of me defined by being chosen, but the version of me capable of recognizing when connection changes shape. The next morning, the house felt unfamiliar not because anything physical had changed, but because awareness transforms perception. Every shared space now carried both memory and understanding. The couch where we once sat close without thinking. The kitchen where conversations flowed easily. The doorway where casual touch once existed without effort. These places had not lost meaning, but their meaning had shifted. They no longer represented continuity. They represented chapters. We spoke kindly that day, carefully, honestly in small ways, even when silence filled the larger spaces between words. There was no attempt to return immediately to what we had been, and that absence of urgency told me more than promises ever could. Some changes cannot be reversed simply by acknowledging them. Recognition does not recreate what has already transformed. It only illuminates what remains and what does not. Throughout the day, I noticed something unexpected within myself. Not numbness, not detachment, but a gradual redirection of emotional energy. The part of me that had been waiting, watching, questioning began to release its hold on uncertainty. I wasn't deciding outcomes. I wasn't planning endings. I was simply allowing reality to exist without resistance. And that acceptance created space where anxiety had once lived. Later, when I was alone again, I allowed myself to revisit the journey that had led me here. The earlier love that had been intense and chaotic. The desire for stability that had guided my choices. The belief that calmness meant security. The hope that consistency guaranteed permanence. None of those feelings had been wrong. They had been human. But I understood something more fully now. No relationship remains unchanged simply because it begins with sincerity. Growth, distance, attention, and time all reshape connection continuously. And sometimes two people do not evolve in the same direction. That realization did not erase regret, but it transformed it. Regret was no longer about choosing one path instead of another. It was about understanding that no choice freezes the future in place. Love is not secured once, it is sustained repeatedly. And when sustaining stops, awareness eventually follows. As evening returned again, I found myself standing in front of the mirror. Not searching for answers, but observing the quiet resilience that had carried me through confusion into clarity. I didn't look stronger than before. I didn't look changed on the surface, but internally something had realigned. I was no longer holding tightly to a version of us that required denial to survive. When I lay down that night, sleep came differently than it had in weeks. Not because everything was resolved, not because pain had disappeared, but because uncertainty no longer occupied every thought. There is a strange peace that comes when you stop resisting what you already know. And in that quiet space between wakefulness and rest, a final realization formed gently, without force, without fear. This story was never only about losing someone. It was about recognizing when holding on had quietly become letting go.